energy's always been a function of a labor cost. We as laborers generate energy to function, right? So now we are autonomous in a way that means we don't need to plug ourselves into a generator or fossil fuel to be functional. So we just eat, right? And then, remain healthy, and then we will have enough energy to do what we're supposed to do. In robotics, obviously, they need to be connected to an outlet of a sort, because they don't self-produce energy, they don't eat, as far as I know. So they kind of need the input of energy. And therefore, absolutely, part of the cost of input in robotics is energy. So it's going to be a function of access to the cheapest source of energy, or having the most efficient robots. So yes, energy is extremely important in this new robot economy. So it's actually pretty dominant. So either you have the most efficient robot or robotic system, meaning it consumes less energy than your competitor, or you have access to the cheapest possible energy. However, a lot of people say energy hubs will become a thing. A country that have not only access to energy but right energy infrastructure will have a competitive advantage, similar to low cost industries, clusters around cheap labor. Think about China 20 years ago, and now Vietnam, right? I mean, everybody relocated there, and therefore to create a competitive advantage. Since humans will be less and less involved, I don't see that. Even if you have the cheapest cost, of producing a unit of energy, think of, I don't know, Libya, for instance, right? I mean, you don't want to relocate. There's no framework around it. Who's going to protect your capital, etc. I said there's more things than just energy, right? Since labor is still also involved in the process. But eventually, yes. I mean, everything else being equal, right? In terms of jurisdiction framework, etc., the energy is a big component. I mean, like we had a cluster of industrial manufacturers in China. Think about Shenzhen, for instance, or think about textile back in the days. I think in the 80s and 90s in China, right? Then we'll probably have the same thing around ecosystem that enable robot economy to function. So, and maybe we'll see new economic zones within even unstable countries that are actually carved out just to kind of serve that purpose, right? Going back to countries that maybe don't have the right framework to attract capital. Maybe they create zones, that just to attract. I mean, think about it. I think Dubai has that. They have the, financial zones, right? I mean, if you're within that, that's their only way. So you have your own set of laws that kind of was borrowed from, the Anglo-Saxon or the English common law. I think I can see that as well for those who have access to energy, but they lack the framework. So, if they're smart about it, then if obviously they're successful in convincing, various actors in robotics to come and set their hub there. Why incentive matters more than intelligence in an autonomous system? Incentive always. I think when Charlie Munger says, "Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome." I think it's even more prevalent in an autonomous system. Think about it, it's an autonomous system, so there's less human intervention, right? So what happened is intelligence in general, especially robotic intelligence, is even though we think about it as multidimensional, is usually they optimize for a specific defined outcome. So if you want them to optimize for speed, for instance, then they will probably take a person from point A to point Z at a maximum possible speed the machine can achieve. However, that is not the right thing to do for society. So yes, you can intelligently drive an engine, but is that, is that the right incentive? No. Is that on its own, if it's safe and if everything else being equal, reliably? Yes. But that's why incentive is more important than intelligence, because it's part of also reliability too, as I mentioned earlier, right? I mean, any error of a sort can set us back or set back, the full orchestration of a system. So if we properly define the incentive of the system and hence the need for human involvement at this point in time, even in a fully autonomous system, then we can achieve the most intelligent outcome on a risk-adjusted basis. This is extremely important. So I think we should define, it's a system, an ecosystem, whether it's autonomous, semi-autonomous, the incentive needs to be there. And the incentive needs to kind of be optimized for the benefit of our society, not for the objective of the machine alone. I think it's great. I think machineries and AI robotic will have a different paradigm. It's, with human, we love to work with very smart people and reliable, of course. And I think that could play a major role in your success or success of your team. In the economics of AI robotics, I don't think it's not about the smartest robot out there. It's about the most reliable. So a robot, I would take a robot that is 95% competent versus a robot that is 100% competent if their uptime of the less competent robot is 99% versus 97% for the genius robot. Why? Because the power of economics in a robotic driven society is the compounding or the geometric. So if you have a downtime, that compounds negatively equally as an uptime, and people don't really have an appreciation for that, because if you miss a day of work, you missed 8 hours. So we measure the economy as an addition, not as a compounding thing. So it's 8 plus 8 plus 8 equals 40 hours a week, etc. In a system that is driven by AI robotic, because of the orchestration and the coordination and the integration, it's exponential. Meaning if you're losing 2-3% downtime, and that time you will never recuperate, and the compounding, go sideways. What is the implication on the consumer when autonomy becomes ubiquitous? Think about it. Amazon was not, we didn't have an ubiquitous system that delivers goods to us same day or within 24 hours. Now we can't live without it, at least in the US and part of the Western world. Same is going to happen to, things that are previously done by human and now could be done by machine in an autonomous way. I think it's going to probably free up more time for the consumers to do things. I'm not buying the fact that we're going to have a universal income and we don't need to work. I think we'll always have work is a meaning. It's not really an income of a sort. So even if you give universal income, people still need to find a meaning to justify their existence. So I think we're probably gonna demand more. We are in consumer society, so obviously if you're gonna free up more times, we obviously gonna create things that we crave before we even knew it they existed. To think about it, before the car existed, there were no need for mechanics. Before computer existed, nobody heard about a software engineer, right? So before social media existed, there was no need for something called content coordinator or social media manager. Same thing when the economy is going to become autonomous, and we're going to have jobs that are in demand that we don't even know of their existence now. So I think it's a positive thing, because it's going to help human in general evolve and keep on evolving. Look, I'm from school of thought that if something ought to be done by non-human in a safe and a reliable manner, then let the machine, whether it's a hardware or software, do it. Let's do something else. Economic unit post-deployment. Post-deployment, I mentioned it's a J curve. So there's cost associated with deploying them. So it will dip a little bit, even though you could be replacing humans, at a 20% output. The integration within an existing system will eat up a lot of your upfront costs. So that's affects the IRR. The coordination. I mean, if somebody comes to you and really has no foresight in terms of the moat around the coordination, then I will pause. Because a lot of people come and have the best robots. I mean, they can do this, they can do that. But that's one of the value ways, is really into having somebody really have a vision to how these entities that are actually obsolete, that need to be constantly updated, will continuously orchestrating and generating exponential growth of capital and output. Last but not least, I don't care if the robot is super intelligent, it's about uptime. How reliable is this robot? And more importantly, the time that robot may not be reliable, how much money are we bleeding? It's not about 97%. It's like that 2 to 3% downtime that is expected throughout the lifespan of this robot. What can happen? What are the various risks? As I mentioned, it's like investing in a superstar, fund manager who's showing you 20% return over, 10 years. You kind of don't worry about the upside takes care of itself, but you worry about if they're wrong, by how much they're wrong. And that's exactly the same thing. That's what slowed down the deployment of robotics anyway. It's like, if they're wrong, what happens? They fail? Can the system break down? Or business as usual? It's like somebody missing a day of work, the company doesn't break down, right? You're just gonna reappear, and it's okay. In robotic orchestration, you wanna know if 10, 20% of these robots are down, or they're idle, or what happened to the overall system. So this is my framework. Think about it, it's a technology of the future. So traditional financing for these technologies usually are reserved for, we call the futurist capitalists, venture capital, maybe corporations, right? So it requires patient capital, because there's a sort of, we call the J curve. So if you start the integration costs, the coordination will cost more than a robot, and it will take a long time. So the first couple of years, you're losing money if you are introducing a robot in a system that has been designed for labor or task undertaken by labor. So that's one. So there's a mismatch between the demand and supply of capital. So you need to kind of match the duration. A robot integration project works well if you have patient capital. Amazon, they publicly funded traded companies, patient capital. They don't have like the typical VC 7 years, and you harvest the first 5 and try to sell the next. So permanent capital, that works very well. And I'm kind of worried about it too, because obviously if we're going to take risk capital and only allow big companies who have big balance sheets, such as Google and Amazon and Facebook or Meta, right, to be like the steward of this, or Tesla now, right, then I think we're gonna have a monopoly, and more on that later on, because they're gonna own the asset. If they're gonna own the asset, that's it. I mean, with labor shrinkage, then we're gonna go into a feudal society, not of the 17 or the Middle Ages, but similar to it. So we still would like to create a new breed of capital that is patient, and hence the need perhaps for a permanent capital vehicle for that. Because I think that the project of deployment, certainly more than 10 years, if you really want them to succeed. The first 2, you can't even look at an ROI, because you're still working other angles as well. So that's the major impediment, I think, of deployment.